Well, it's the Easter time, the Passover time, when that they are celebrating in the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem had a population of 40,000. During the Passover celebration, they were having about 120,000 people. So can you imagine? It was so crowded. That city was so crowded. So from the Mount of Olives, you can contemplate the temple, the majesty of the temple. It was a beautiful temple that Herod had built for his people. So the temple size was about like 22 stadiums of football. So can you imagine? It was a big temple. It had walls. It was surrounded by walls. That's why it was so big. And then in the middle of the land, there was the temple, a smaller place. So you can contemplate the smoke of the sacrifices from the Mount of Olives. You can hear the flutes, sounding, playing. You can hear the music. So you can have the beautiful view for the temple from the Mount of Olives. So people were going there. But there were people coming from all over. Even pagans were coming. Some of them were interested in the Jewish faith, so they were going. So they were so excited about the faith. Perhaps they were familiar with the wisdom of the Psalms and some of the writings from the Jews. So some of the Greeks, the Greeks that we hear today, they are going to the temple. But when they are going to the temple, they find out there is a big sign on one of the walls of the temple that pagans were not to enter any farther under the penalty of death. So they were not allowed to go any farther because otherwise they were going to be put to death. So you can imagine the Greeks, they wanted to see the temple, they wanted to see God in the temple, and they are not able to do it. But they hear about Jesus. So they want to see Jesus. Who is this man who people are saying that is a prophet, someone who has come? So they go, and they go to Philip. Philip, the gospel is telling that he was from Bethsaida, so probably he was speaking some Greek. So they communicate with him. They want to see Jesus. The word that they are using is oreo, the Greek oreo, which means not to see the external looking, but to see the identity of Jesus, who Jesus is. They want to find out who Jesus is. Sometimes when you are at the airport and somebody goes walking by and then you ask your friend and you say, you know who that man is? And they might say, well, just one person, one more. But then you say, well, no, that's the person who won the Nobel Prize for Peace. We are able to see the identity of that person. You see farther than the other person. In the old times, in the church, the way that they were preaching, they were focusing too much on the passion of Christ. So they were seeing the external aspect of Jesus. And they were just seeing the suffering of Jesus, preaching about the suffering. And then people were weeping into tears. But, and then perhaps the ones who was preaching was feeling like he did a great sermon because he made the people weep. But he was the preacher perhaps was not looking farther, because what is important is not only the suffering of Jesus, the external. That's what we see. But why did he do that? He did that out of love for humanity. And that's the greatest revelation that we find on the cross. He loved humanity in such a way that he endured suffering, even the cross. And he died for all of us, for humanity. That's to be able to see farther the love of God that is manifested on the cross. So when Philip and Andrew, they go to Jesus and they tell him about the Greeks that are looking for him, they want to see him. That's when Jesus says, it is the time for the Son of Man to be glorified. In other words, it's the time for the Son of Man to reveal the real face of God. And the real face of God is the face of love. It's manifested when He gives Himself on the cross for humanity. And that's what we contemplate on the cross. When we contemplate the cross, we are not contemplating only the suffering of Jesus, but the greatest revelation of God. He loved humanity in such a way that He gave everything for us, even His life, to save us. So the God that Jesus is revealing, the face that He is revealing to the Greeks and to all of us, is the face of love. That's who God is. And that face is manifested in the way that He was serving, the way that He was hanging out with sinners, eating with them, celebrating with them, the way that He was able to forgive, the adulterous woman that was brought to Him, and He restored her dignity and raised her up. He forgave her. That's the new face of God. The face of God that He was bringing to those that He was serving, the ones that He was healing. That's the face of God. That's why Jesus goes on in the gospel and He says that if the grain of wheat do not die, doesn't produce fruit. But if it dies, it produces fruit and abundance. And that's what love does. Love produces good works. So sometimes the temptation is that we stay in this life. Nobody wants to die. But life is like water in your hands. It just goes like this really fast. It disappears really fast. And that's the sadness of life, that we cannot keep it forever in this life. But life just goes out of our hands. And then sometimes we want to stay in this life very comfortable, not to suffer, to have everything that we want. And Jesus is telling us, if you want to preserve your life, you will lose it. You want to enjoy life and to be selfish and to think about yourself and put yourself first. He says, you will lose your life. But if you give your life like the grain of wheat, and then you start serving and putting the other first, and you love your family, you serve them, and you try to be the best for them, then Jesus is telling us, if you sacrifice yourself for them, for the well-being of others, you will preserve your life. You will save it. You will save it. And that's something that we see, for example, the parents, when there is a football on TV, and we can say the Super Bowl, and then you know that your son is sick, and you say, well, I need to be with my son at the hospital. I'm not going to be able to see the Super Bowl. I need to be there with my son. Or sometimes you want to do something else, and you know that you have to serve your son or daughter with the homework, and you are present to them. You have to give up something, to be present. There is a story about Maximilian Kolbe, who was a Franciscan priest. He was in Auschwitz. He was in prison in Auschwitz. So they lined all these men. They lined these men up, and then they were choosing who was going to die from these men. So they pick up this man who was, when he was picked up to be put to death, he started weeping, crying, and he says, well, what about my wife, my children? And then Maximilian, who was on that line, he says, General, I ask permission to take the place of this man. I want to die instead of him. And then the general says, permission granted. And then he's put in a cage on there. It was like a basement, and he was starving. That's the way that he died, starving to death. That's the way that they put him to death. And he was singing psalms when he was dying to the Lord and giving praise to the Lord. That's the way that he died. So giving one's life for the well-being of others. That's what Jesus did at the cross. And that's what we are called to do. To put the ones who God has entrusted to us first. Love them and to be there for them. There's another story about the Count of Nicholas Zinzendorf. One day he went to a museum in Paris, a gallery of art, and then he saw this picture of Ecce Homo, which Jesus being crucified, dying on the cross. And then underneath of the cross, on the painting, there was this saying, it says, "This is what I did for you. What is it that you have done for me?" And the Count, Nicholas, he was contemplating this picture of Jesus. And then when he read that, he realized that he has not done anything for Jesus. And then he decided that he had to do something about it. He was contemplating that painting for hours until they closed the museum. And then the following day, he decided to do something for Jesus. So he decided to serve people. He gave up his wealth to help other people, serving always. And then he used to say, "My passion is Christ. My passion is Christ." I think there is always something that we can do for other people. And that's the way that Jesus overcomes the power of the devil, the evil one from this world. The evil one usually asks us to look at oneself, to be selfish, to forget about the others, to forget about God, and then you live for oneself. But Jesus says that the way that he overcomes the evil one of this world will be when he is being raised up on the cross. Because then humanity will know how much he loves them as he dies for humanity. That's what we contemplate on the cross. So love always overcomes evil. That's the way that Jesus wins the battle, with love. We were created for love. Humanity cannot resist love. And that's what Jesus constantly tells us, the love that he has for us. We ask the Lord to help us to see what God has done for us, to try to do the same for other people, for those who God has entrusted to us in our families, in this community. Amen.